Hi everyone, it's been a really long time since I've made a video. I haven't checked my old videos to see, but I think it might be the longest break I've ever actually taken on YouTube, or at least one of the longest breaks, which was not my intention. When I decided to take a break back in April, I thought that I might be taking kind of 2 months off or something like that. It's ended up being, I think, more than about 4.5 months. Editing on you from the future, jumping in here, I just wanted to quickly explain before I get into the rest of this video that I actually recorded this video a month ago, and I wasn't fully happy with the content and everything that I was choosing to talk about as my kind of comeback video, and I re-recorded it yesterday only to discover today when I went to edit it that my microphone has actually broken and that video recorded without any audio whatsoever, and I don't know when I'm going to be able to record another video because yeah, my microphone is broken and the microphone on this camera, as you can hear, is terrible. But I just wanted to very quickly explain that this video is a month old, it's a little bit out of date, and also that I did have other things that I wanted to talk about with regards to just what I've been thinking about in the last month or so and where my mind has been at. I don't think I have acknowledged in this video Black Lives Matter and just all of the political turmoil that has been arising in the midst of this pandemic, and that didn't sit well with me. That was something that I just didn't acknowledge, and I haven't yet acknowledged on the channel. And I talked a little bit in the video that I recorded yesterday about really just my concerns, ongoing concerns over many years now, about how I have never felt that this channel is a place for me to really talk about politics, and I don't think that is what I want my content to be. But at the same time, issues like Black Lives Matter and the ecological, the climate crisis, these are things that go beyond politics, that are just really fundamental problems that we are facing in the world right now, and that have to do with fundamental human rights and suffering that people are facing and will face in the future. And I'm struggling to figure out how to best address that and how to maybe not push that under the rug and feel like I'm pushing that under the rug when I'm creating content that does not necessarily overtly deal with those questions and so on. I don't feel like I'm qualified necessarily to add to those conversations in any hugely meaningful way, but at the same time I don't want to be silent on them either. And I'm going to make another video as soon as I can get a microphone up and running. I'm going to make another video kind of rehashing what I was saying in that video that I recorded yesterday, because this is a very important topic to me right now, and it's something that I'm going to have to address and solve for myself in the coming months as I get back into creating content. And I will say that I'm definitely not kind of fully back. I don't know when I'm next going to be making a video. I'm not going to be back to making weekly videos necessarily, because I have still not submitted my PhD. That is going to be happening in the next few weeks, hopefully, but it's not quite there yet. So I think this video, I'm just going to kind of do a sort of update, but use that update to talk around what's been happening for me spiritually, seeing as that is the focus of this channel. I kind of want to talk around all the different things that have been happening in my life from a spiritual perspective, largely speaking, and touch a little bit on what my spiritual practice has looked like during this difficult time, and how it's changed, and so on and so forth. So yeah, and I just kind of want to bring you all back up to speed so that, you know, when I do start making videos more regularly again, I've kind of already covered everything that's happened in the last kind of 4.5 months, at least to some extent, so that I don't have to kind of do this at a later date. So first of all, I hope that you're all doing okay. I know that in terms of COVID, depending on where you are in the world, things may be better than they were when I saw you last, or they may be worse. And obviously it's something that we're all still really struggling through together. Here in Ireland, things are, I would like to say more stable. It's not brilliant. We still have, quite a number of restrictions, and because my parents are going to be coming to Dublin fairly soon. I am currently sort of semi-self-isolating. I'm like happy enough to kind of go for walks, meet people out of doors and so on, but I'm kind of limiting the amount of time I'm spending indoors with other people to a huge extent until they come, because I don't want to be putting them at risk. They're not having anyone into their house, they're not going into anyone else's houses, and I don't want to do anything that they wouldn't be doing. For kind of 2 weeks before they come to Dublin. So that's kind of my experience of COVID right now. I came back to Dublin just over 2 months ago. So I've been here on my own ever since. And that's kind of how I'm now seeing through COVID. And I think I expected that it would be lonelier than it actually has been. I've actually found it to be okay. I've been surprised by that, by how much I've gotten used to seeing people a lot less than I normally would. But it's gotten to a point where it's quite normal for me to go, say, 6 days without seeing anyone else apart from when I go for walks and runs outside. And like I would talk to somebody on Zoom or Skype in that time, but that's become normal, which is just totally strange for me. But like I say, I've been pleasantly surprised by how quickly I've gotten used to that. I have gotten more and more comfortable with my own company over the last 10 years of kind of living alone for most of that time. So I'm lucky in that regard, which is great. I actually think that I'm doing better now than I was when I was living with my parents, because living with my parents wasn't normal for me. I think any of you who have been in that situation of moving back into with your parents for a period of time, it is stressful. It's difficult. It's just not something that feels natural. I love my parents. We get along very well. We are very close, but it's still just not something that really feels right. It doesn't sit right. So I thought that it was going to be a very positive thing for me to be with them during COVID, that I wouldn't be alone and so on. And to some degree that was true. But I think ultimately, we're all three of us, are maybe doing a little bit better now that we're kind of separated back into our separate households, and we can just, talk on the phone, talk on WhatsApp or Zoom or Skype or whatever, whenever we feel like. So that's kind of my living situation at the moment. I am doing much, much better. So the reason that I stopped making videos back in April, I did make a kind of community post at the time, but I didn't upload a video explaining why. So I'm aware that some of you just won't really have known why I stopped making videos all of a sudden back in April. So the reason that I did that was because I suffered the worst deterioration of my mental health probably that I've ever experienced in my life. I had the worst anxiety that I've ever had in my life by some stretch. I think the other worst times in my life, I went through periods of depression and some anxiety as well, especially as I got older. I tended more towards anxiety than depression. But this was just on a level that I had never experienced before. And it was COVID was a factor, and I had some personal life situations, or a situation that was going on that was also a huge factor and much bigger, I think, than I even realized at the time. But a huge driving factor, and I think actually might have been a symptom of the anxiety as well, was something that I think I did allude to a few times in the videos that I made back in the spring, but I started experiencing what seemed like an allergic reaction. It never became really severe. I was lucky. I ended up having to call for an ambulance a couple of times, and I went to A&E once, but I was never totally sure whether those experiences had actually been due to severe swelling, internal swelling, or if I was actually just having a panic attack. It can be very, very hard to tell the two apart. But I did actually experience physical symptoms. I had sort of mild swelling on my face, around my neck, and so on, around my abdomen and around my eyes. And that has still been coming and going. So that's been an ongoing struggle. It's not really something that's ever happened to me before. I think it's related to the apparent allergies that I started getting a year and a half ago. Excuse me. I made a video about that because I was talking about having to become a non-vegan, having to go back to that vegetarianism and actually ultimately pescatarianism because of the amount of dietary restrictions that I had to impose when I first started having these kind of symptoms. But this was above and beyond anything I'd ever had before. Like with that experience before, when I went off nuts, when I thought that I had an allergy to nuts, I would kind of feel a slight tightening in my throat. I would feel like my tongue was kind of uncomfortable and burning and like a little bit swollen. And that was pretty much the extent of it. That was as extreme as it would get. I had a swollen lower lip like, you know, once or twice, and that was it. And then once I eliminated the food out of my diet, it would stop happening. And I had it very much under control. Whereas this was a situation where the swelling became chronic. So I had, you know, slight swelling in my lips that went on for 2 months without abating. I had this kind of swelling on my neck that went on for about 4 months, actually. Took a very, very long time for it to die down again. So yeah, that was really the driving struggle and the driving thing that was, you know, I was just terrified, because once you get into that kind of anxiety mentality, everything starts to feel like a bigger threat than it even is. And so I was just, even though it was clear that it wasn't getting any worse and that I wasn't actually in any danger, I was just constantly convinced, just deeply convinced that I was in danger and that this was going to get worse and that it was going to become life-threatening. Like, that was the fear that kind of built up in me. And yeah, I'm still not exactly sure what caused that. I'm still taking medications to try and get it under control. And I don't know if it's going to be something that I'm going to have to deal with for the rest of my life or for a short period of time, or yeah, I still don't know if it was an allergy, if it was a seasonal allergy, if it was a dust allergy. 'Cause the allergy tests kind of didn't show up anything in terms of food. It was all just the usual allergens that I already kind of know that I have, like dust, grass pollen, cats, and so on. So I'm kind of still at a loss, but I do suspect that it's largely anxiety driven. I actually think that it might have been a physical manifestation of my anxiety, because it seems to be correlated with times when I am feeling particularly stressed or run down or anxious or upset. Then I will often have a flare up the next day. So yeah, that's what I've been kind of trying to get under control, and it got to a point where I was just sort of barely coping with life. I took a while, had to take a break from the PhD for a while as well, and I was really just focusing in on building up a toolkit for myself for dealing with really severe anxiety, which is just something that I never had to do before in my life. Something that I discovered, I guess, through this experience was that my go-to in those times of like severe need and severe stress and strain was not to my spiritual practice, which I think was interesting. It felt like when I was really at that really kind of dark place of barely kind of struggling to cope, like spiritual practice felt just so removed from my day-to-day life. It felt so removed from what I needed or what I even had space to think about, that it really went completely out the window. The entire time that I was in Kerry, you know, after I had celebrated the Sabbath, I celebrated 2 Sabbaths. So I did celebrate Bealtaine, sort of. While I was there, I was kind of well enough to sort of just about do a ritual and celebrate that. I wasn't doing too badly actually at that point at the beginning of May. There were very much fluctuations in the entire time. But I definitely found that apart from that, I had no interest in sitting at an altar. I had no interest in really thinking about my spirituality or thinking in that way. Which might be a surprise, and it was a little bit of a surprise to me, I think, because for a lot of people, their religion or their spirituality is a comfort to them, and it's something that will help them, bolster them, and get them through a really difficult time. And I found, like I say, slightly to my surprise, that was not the case. One thing that was a huge saving grace for me, though, was meditation. But I moved entirely from meditation on the breath to guided meditations, because I found that, focusing on my breath was the last thing that I needed to do, at least without any guidance, because I was totally preoccupied. And probably this was exacerbated by COVID and by just being constantly thinking about respiratory illness and respiratory problems. Focusing on the breath, my biggest fear was that I would not be able to breathe, that would become a problem for me. So focusing on the breath, terrible idea. So I discovered that the best thing for me, the only thing that could really bring a panic attack kind of under control, that could bring my anxiety down, that could bring swelling down, was guided meditations. And that became kind of the mainstay of my toolkit for coping at that time. So I used primarily Insight Timer. I also downloaded Headspace again and used that a little bit. But I found a few meditations that really worked for me. Primarily body scan meditations I found were by far the best thing for me to deal with that level of anxiety. And then I had a couple of sort of emergency guided meditations that were actually focused on the breath. Those were for actual panic attacks. Trying to listen to anything longer or slower moving just would not work. I wouldn't even be able to convince myself to try to do that. But I had a couple of sort of 3-minute guided meditations on the breath to kind of try and get my breathing under control for when I was experiencing a panic attack. That really helped as well, and that was under the guidance of my therapist. So that was another thing that I started doing in April. I really threw everything that I had into getting all of this under control and getting myself back to a healthy place again. So I started therapy, which I'm still doing. I'm not going to talk about that a whole lot. I have gone to counsellors and therapists before in the past, but never for this kind of extended period of time, actually. It's always been mostly free counselling through university services, and they generally give you 4 to 8 weeks and then you're kind of out, that's it. If they think that you need further help, then they'll probably refer you to somewhere else, but that's kind of the amount that the university will offer because it's a free service in the UK and Ireland. So that was kind of my only experience with that, and I found that to be a godsend. I nearly went on antidepressants at one point, at a couple of points actually. I was prescribed them by my GP in Kerry, but I started therapy at almost exactly the same time that I was prescribed those medications, and I in the end decided not to go on them because I had a gut feeling that this was going to be a temporary problem that I was going through, that I was going to be able to pull myself out of it with a bit of help, and that the kind of long-term help that an antidepressant would provide wasn't really what I needed, and that it just that it wasn't the correct answer to the kind of problem that I was facing. I kind of knew it was going to be probably just a few bad months, and I was right. So yeah, those are the things that I focus on mostly. So for anyone who is dealing with anxiety during this time, and I think that a lot of people have been struggling. I think any of us who have a tendency towards depression or anxiety, mental health problems, are probably struggling under the current circumstances. So if any of that helps you, then I'm really glad. In terms of cost, obviously the biggest problem with therapists is often that it's too expensive. My therapist, he offers a reduced price for students or unemployed people, which obviously I fit into. So that's how I'm able to afford that. And maybe you'd be able to find an alternative that works for you as well, some way of financing that, because finances are a big problem at the moment. But yeah, a few other things that I used in order to kind of control the levels of anxiety that I was experiencing, again, in case it's useful for you. A big one was playing guitar and singing. I discovered that would often bring down a lot of the symptoms that I was experiencing, including the swelling or difficulty breathing and things like that. I think because it just switches your brain into a kind of a different state. You're focused on what you're doing and playing the music, and with singing, you're regulating your breath. You have to regulate your breath in order to sing, and so it's actually a brilliant way to kind of bring down that kind of panic response. So that was absolutely a game changer once I realized. It was actually my dad who suggested it for some reason. I think he just knew from experience that when I played music that it tended to kind of calm me down just in general in life. He'd seen that in me maybe when I was in my teens or when I was younger, and so he recommended that. He said, give it a go, and it worked so well. And yoga as well. I did a fair bit of yoga. That was kind of my main. Walking and yoga were my kind of main exercise that I did at that time. Walking as well, that was a big one. I wasn't running because I was nervous about my breathing. I found that if I tried to run, I tended to end up hyperventilating and so on, and so it was just a little bit harder for me. I think if I could have been running, it would have helped a lot, but I just wasn't able to go there. It just wasn't yeah, just mentally, physically, it just didn't feel like I was capable of it at that time. And so I also took the biggest break from running that I've ever taken since I started. But walking was very important, brisk walking up hills. I would go for long walks, 5-6 kilometers a day at least. I was pretty much aiming to get my 10,000 steps a day in every day. I would go for 2 walks a day, which was, technically not allowed at the time of the height of our lockdown, but like out in the middle of nowhere in rural Kerry, we all kind of figured it's not going to harm anyone if I go out for a second short walk, because I wouldn't be encountering any other people anyway. When I was out for those walks, it's a very different situation than when you're in a city. So yeah, those became the kind of the bedrock of how I dealt with everything. And but I think that the biggest thing that has really helped me come back to myself was just getting back to Dublin. Honestly, I think all of those kind of set the foundation for me to kind of come back to myself, get everything under control. But I really discovered that getting back here, getting back home, having my own space again, and getting back into a kind of better routine gradually has been the biggest thing that has really helped me get from a point where I was just feeling the worst that I ever had. Like April and May for me were probably the 2 worst months of my life. And now I'm at a point where I'm pretty much feeling as good and as happy as I almost ever do, which is just an amazing contrast. And I think the biggest thing for me really has been getting back to Dublin. Like I say, getting back into a routine. I've been getting up earlier again and getting back into exercise. So I have started running. I've been running 5 times a week, which is more than I ever have before, because it's just been feeling really good. It's been working well for me. I haven't been getting exhausted or anything like that, and it's just been really good. And I've also been strength training in a serious way for the first time in my life. I had the good foresight to buy some, what do you call them? The dumbbells where you can change the weight on them before lockdown, like back at kind of Christmas time. So I've been adding some extra weight plates to those as I progress, and just doing some fairly simple full body strength training exercise 3 days a week. And that has also been like honestly a game changer. I think it's really helped me to just feel stronger and more energetic, and to also be able to run more, which in turn is helping with my anxiety and so on. So that's pretty much what's been happening. I've obviously had some stuff going on in my personal life, which I don't want to get into here on the channel. I don't think there's any need for me to really talk about that in any detail, but suffice to say that I had a situation with somebody in my life where there have been huge ups and downs over the past sort of 7 months. It's just shaped the entirety of this year for me so far. And basically COVID did not help the situation. I think things were going to get funky anyway, but absolutely didn't help. And yeah, I'm in a position now where we're back on a sort of somewhat even keel, but I'm taking space from that person for a while. And I think that's why I'm kind of, again, back to this sort of steadiness again in my life. But that has been also just a huge factor in how this year has seemed to me so far. You've probably noticed like spirituality really didn't fit in there at all. As I said, it really just didn't become part of my toolkit for dealing with mental health whatsoever, which I think was interesting. But once I got back to Dublin, I did actually start to want to spend time at the altar. I was excited to get back to kind of my main like real altar again, and to have space in this room. And bit by bit, I've just kind of organically been kind of getting back into the flow of it without really enforcing it on myself. I never kind of guilted myself into wanting to spend more time at the altar or thinking I should be doing more spiritual practice. I think I've finally learned that that is not the way to go, that there's no need. There's just, I think spiritual practice always ebbs and flows in our lives, especially when we are solitary practitioners. I think it's very natural that it's something that sometimes we don't have time for. Sometimes our circumstances mean that we actually just can't physically sit down at the altar every day, spend time there, do ritual and so on, and we have to kind of come up with more creative ways to fulfill that need in our lives, and sometimes it just drops out of our life completely. And I think that's fine and normal, and I don't think it means that you're going to lose everything that you've gained out of your spirituality, because I have discovered that it feels like it's all coming back to me quite quickly, and like I am managing to gradually pick back up where I left off, even say 5 years ago before I went to Edinburgh. Because one interesting thing that has happened for me is that I have actually started doing very tiny just devotionals every day for the Morrigan again, which is something I haven't done in years, honestly, in a really kind of dedicated way. It felt, I was saying this to a friend who is probably watching this video, so shout out to you if you are. I was saying to a friend the other day who was also a Morrigan devotee that and I probably have said this before many times on the channel as well, that it felt like the Morrigan sort of drove me to Edinburgh. She just sent me to Edinburgh. There was no other time in my life that I really ever felt so much as though I could understand my life through the lens of personified deity, and feeling just pushed towards doing something or guided towards doing something by a specific deity. It's really been my only experience of that kind of rubric making sense for me. It just felt so overt. And she just sort of sent me to Edinburgh, so to speak, and then just disappeared again out of my life. But now that I'm back in Ireland, back in Dublin, and maybe now as well that my PhD is winding down, and getting to the end of that, and I'm kind of aware that I'm entering into a new phase, a new chapter, I just started feeling a draw. So part of it really was, I think, because I said before on the channel that I was going to try mixing up my altar seasonally and working with a different deity each season, so that I would have Cernunnos for the summer, the Morrigan for autumn, Odin for winter, and Gaia for spring. And I found that I cycled through the whole year and didn't really do any kind of devotional work for any of those other deities. Like the altar kind of changed and I had them represented on that altar, and I just didn't feel moved to adding in any extra devotion. But as soon as it came back round to the Morrigan, which was actually at the beginning at Lunasa, I consider autumn to start at Lunasa, and I changed the altar to represent the Morrigan again, and immediately just felt like I felt drawn to doing a daily devotional. So I'm interested to see where that goes. I feel like I'm gradually maybe slipping back into something like my practice looked more like before I went to Edinburgh, or at the beginning kind of few months when I was in Edinburgh, and that was like doing those small daily devotionals was a part of my practice. I'm very excited actually to discover when I finish the PhD just maybe more headspace, and I think I'm going to have more headspace for thinking about spirituality and religion in a more personal, subjective way as well, rather than kind of picking it apart in an academic kind of critical way, which has been, as I've said again and again, has been an unexpectedly destructive experience on my spiritual practice for me. So that's been happening, and then I've also found that I've been wanting to really deepen my meditation practice again. I realised that because I was using all of those guided meditations, I realised that I really hadn't been doing any just meditation on the breath at the altar or whatever. I hadn't been doing that in months and months and months. And I'd become very reliant on doing these kind of guided meditations. I generally did them lying down to sort of, maximise the relaxation element of them. But I gradually got to a point where I no longer needed them. I started doing meditations in the morning on the breath, short meditations, and then I was still doing my guided meditations in the evening, and just very slowly it kind of naturally phased out because, like I say, I just didn't feel that I needed it to relax at night. And then I felt just called to, I'm rereading a meditation book right now, which I cannot for the life of me remember the name or the author, and I couldn't be bothered running inside to get it and show you, but I'll put a picture of the title. I'll overlay it over this video when I'm editing, and I'll put in like the name of it'll be in the down bar anyway. But it's kind of the most straightforward, simple meditation book that I've ever read, in that it's just a very good guide for a beginner meditator, but I'm finding it very good to kind of come back to get back to the basics. And it's just inspired me to start doing daily 15-minute meditations on the breath every morning, and really trying again with it. I think it's been a really long time since I've made any effort with my meditation practice to really get deeper and to really properly meditate. I think I've been going through the motions for a really long time. So I think things have just very organically changed for me and come back to a place where I feel like I was the last time that I lived in Dublin. Wasn't living in this house, I was living in Ranelagh, but I'm living alone again, living in Dublin again. So that's kind of that's where I'm at. I think I'm going to wrap it up there. I think I ended up talking about spirituality a lot less than I was planning to in this video. I definitely kind of talked more about my experiences with mental health problems and dealing with that and so on. But I think that's fine. I think that'll do for now. And I think as I find more time to think about and read about spiritual practice again for my own sake, I'm going to have more to talk about on the channel. I mean, that's also been a factor. I've obviously been very busy and I have been wanting to continue to focus on the PhD and get that done. But it's also just been a factor that, because I'm putting all my energy right now pretty much into just exercise, PhD, and then like the small amount of spiritual practice that I'm doing, I just haven't had any time or space, mental space, to be reading, whether it's books or blogs or watching videos about spirituality. I just haven't been in that headspace. And so then of course I'm not naturally going to be coming up with topics to talk about. I'm not going to have anything to kind of offer you on that subject. So I am really looking forward to just really feeding that part of my life again in the near future. But like I say, not sure when that's going to happen. You'll have to kind of bear with me, but I did just kind of want to break the silence, make a video to kind of explain what has been happening in my life over the past kind of 4 to 5 months, and check in and say hi, and let me know how you're doing. Let me know down below, because I am really curious. I've been thinking about all of you, especially those of you who do comment regularly. You know, I obviously recognize your usernames, and I you know, we've built up a relationship over many years, some of us. And yeah, it has been a bit strange to be kind of going through all this time and not be hearing from you, and be kind of wondering, like, I hope they're all doing okay. And yeah, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear how you're doing, and how this experience has been panning out for you so far. And yeah, just stay strong, and so much love to all of you. I hope to be making more videos pretty soon. Certainly, yeah, in the next month or so anyway. PhD will be starting to be a thing of the past. The first stage will be over anyway, and yeah, we can kind of move on to other things.